Good morning, class. You may be seated. Okay, let's go ahead and open class with prayer. Father, thank you that you have loved us and you have loved our Commonwealth. And Lord, I want to thank you that you especially love this class. Lord, that you desire to reveal yourself to us and to shape these young men and women into the image of your Son and use them as a blessing to the Bluegrass State. So Lord, I ask that you would deepen their hearts in love for each other, for the churches, and for the state. And God, that you would be blessed by our class today in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I want to do a short lecture today. I want to do, I think, maybe like 3 review type things, and then look at a few things in this chapter, chapter 2. The first thing that I want to review is just the whole book. If you'll open up to the table of contents, I think Mrs. Krosick passed just the table of contents out for you. You'll see that there are 5 different sections. I'm going to flip to that real quick here so I can read those to you. So there's 5 sections in the table of contents. The first one, if you'll see, is Pioneer Days. That's where we are right now. And the second one is the struggle for independence. Now that's not independence from England, that's independence from Virginia. This is where we try to become a state. And then number 3 is the founding of the Commonwealth. Once we are granted statehood in 1792, then we need to get established, and we'll talk about the establishment of our state. And then after that comes the Civil War, and then the New Kentucky. It's kind of funny. It's the New Kentucky goes from 1865 to 1900. That's very old Kentucky for us. But these first 3 chapters, or these first 3 sections, you also have another piece of paper that we passed out, and it was the it's just the 3 different sections. It's a graph. You'll see it. It's Pioneer Days, the struggle for independence, and the founding of the Commonwealth. Pull that out and look at it real quick. I want you to see some things. There are some key dates and events, and by the time we get to the end of this 3rd section, I would want you to know generally most of these dates and most of these individuals. There are going to be some that may not be as significant as others. I'll point those out, but most of these would be people that you would want to know who they are. So if you look on Pioneer Days, which is the section we're in right now, Thomas Walker, you know who that is. Certainly you know where Harrodsburg, Boonesboro is. The Transylvania Land Company, we'll talk about that. The first women in Kentucky at Boonesboro, some exciting stories about how they comported themselves during Indian raids, Kentucky becoming a county, those kinds of things. So get those events and dates. And then, of course, the battles in this section are all revolutionary battles. And then key individuals and key concepts. So look at that, and as we go through these next 3 chapters, pay close attention, kind of commit these things to memory. And for sure, kind of know this period of time, what's going on during this period of time. Okay? The other thing that I wanted to review, and I probably should have done this one first, but I didn't, so here we go. I wanted to review the just the reason for studying history, because I think as we get into the actual history, you'll understand more how the study of history helps you do those 4 things we talked about in the first chapter of the My Land book, okay? So, remember there were 4 characters, not 8, 4. 16, count in the mirror. There were 4 primary characters. There was David, David's mighty men, Esther, and Daniel. Here's the 4 things that we talked about are strengthened or full results or 4 things that are strengthened by your study of history. With David, we talked about serving the purposes of God in your generation. With Esther, we talked about being born specifically for the time that God has placed you. And with Daniel, we talked about knowing God and being strong and being able to stand in the onslaught of darkness. And then the 4th one was, and not particularly in this order, but the 4th one was the sons of Issachar. They understood the times and they knew what to do. So they understood the times. They knew they were born for this specific period. They were strong and stood against the darkness, and they served the purposes of God in their generation. So as we study and we see these really, really exciting stories, then I hope you are kind of captured, especially in the spirit of courage, which is the 3rd thing that I want to review very quickly. We talked about courage as being the means between 2 extremes. One extreme is to be a coward. The other extreme is to be rash. Those are called vices. It is a vice to be rash, and it is a vice to be a coward. But the virtue is the mean between the 2. And the virtue has to do with being able to act properly according to reason in difficult situations. Reason may tell you to leave. Reason may tell you to fight. But courage does not follow emotion. It follows reason. And so a reasonable person in the midst of challenge will do what is right. And what's right is generally loving for the people around them and the people that they're loyal to. Okay? So, let me review one more thing, just to remind you from last chapter. We talked a lot about the Indians. The earlier Indians in Kentucky were mound builders. After the mound builders, the Cherokee were in the southeast, and the Shawnee were all across the northern part of Kentucky. And so the Shawnee and the Cherokee are the 2 primary tribes. Mostly the Shawnee would be the tribe that we had interaction with in those early years in the founding of Kentucky. Okay, so that's all the review. Let's go ahead and let's hop over to the manual, if I can find it. I don't even know if I have it open or not. Oh, yep, there it is. Okay, let's go to chapter 2. If you've got your books, you can flip down to chapter 2. And same theme. I mean, this period of time is dark. It's a lot of people. Just imagine that you've left a booming community where all of your friends, your cousins' cousins live, and everyone has houses, there's roads, and then you come and you are placed in the middle of the woods, hundreds of miles away, days away, and there are Indians all around you. After a while, it would become pretty depressing. At the very beginning, it was all men. And the 2nd year, I believe, that Boonesboro was established, some other women came. And you're going to start getting some stories about some women and some young girls in these chapters that come. And so let's go ahead, and I'm just going to read the beginning of chapter 2 to get us started. In the year 1775, permanent homes were made in Kentucky. James Herod and his company came back to their cabins, which they had been forced to leave by Indian hostilities. So if you'll remember, Fort Herod was established in 1774, but because the Indian activity had been so intense, they packed up and they went home for the winter. But the next year, 2 or 3 groups came back. Benjamin Logan came back. Daniel Boone came back. The McAfees came back. The McAfees are the men who were here with Colonel Patterson, and we'll talk about Colonel Patterson later on. But the McAfees were a couple of brothers who were long hunters, and they made camp in what became Lexington. And so they've come back, and so now you've got 200 or 300 men, and then the following year, Daniel Boone is going to bring his wife, his family, and a few other women. And so they're here, they're talking about the land, and one of the things that happened is Daniel Boone had been hired by a fellow named Samuel Henderson. Daniel Boone had gone back and talked about all the land, and so Samuel Henderson and some other businessmen saw this as a great opportunity. So they got together a delegation, and they went down and they spoke with the Cherokee Nation. They met down in the southeast, and they had this day of arbitration, and basically a large section of Kentucky was bought. It was called Transylvania, or the land on the other side. And you may have heard of Transylvania College, but it was on the other side of the mountains. And they bought it for a couple of wagon loads of like axe heads, probably some whiskey, some beads. Indians, it seems that beads were very desirable to the Indians. And so they made this trade, and Samuel Henderson thought that he owned it. As it turned out, the Transylvania Company was illegal, and as Transylvania means beyond the woods, not beyond the mountains. So it would be the plains that are on the other side of the woods. Anyway, so it turns out that the Transylvania Company was not a legal transaction, so they didn't own it. But Samuel Henderson hired Daniel Boone and some other settlers, or some other pioneers, to cut a road. And originally it was called Boones Road, but we know it as the Wilderness Road. It began over in eastern Kentucky at the Cumberland Gap, down pretty close to where North Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky come together. But it's coming out of Virginia into Kentucky. There's a gap there where you can get through without great difficulty. And that Wilderness Road was cut through the woods all the way up to what is now Boonesboro, or Fort Boone, over in, I think it's Madison County. It could be Clark County, but it's right on, I bet it's Madison County, because it's on the south side of the Kentucky River right there. And so he cut that road, and it ended at Boonesboro. And when they were coming through, it wasn't just the labor. It wasn't as difficult as the book says. It was perilous. And right off the bat, they're going to be talking about courage. And what is courage? Courage is the ability to act, to do the right thing in the midst of challenge or difficulty. Not to be a coward and run off if you shouldn't. Not to be brash and engage if you shouldn't. But courage is the ability to do the right thing. And just as they were getting near the end of establishing the Wilderness Road, you read about it, what happened is the Indians attacked. And after they attack, there's one man who is wounded, he was so wounded that they couldn't move him. He would have died. And so what they did is a number of the men stayed with him, with the Indians around still, protecting him from the Indians, while the larger group went on ahead and found a place where they were going to build the fort. And then they came back and took the whole group over to the place where they built the fort. But one of the things the book talks about is that they were very heroic and courageous. So you can see each of these stories that they talk about, they're going to show you the place where, in order for the job to get accomplished, for the goal to be reached, for the task to be performed, there had to be courage. The ability to act according to the situation. All right. So, the text will go on and we'll talk about how they had sort of a government set up for the Transylvania Company, but as I told you, the Transylvania Company turned out to be illegal, and so there was no real future for that government. But it was in the year 1776 that Kentucky, which had been part of a county in Fincastle, in Virginia, called Fincastle County. It was in 1776, and what else happened in 1776? Declaration of Independence. It was that same year that Virginia allowed Kentucky to be her own county. As her own county, she could elect 2 representatives to go and be part of the government in Virginia, but they could also have their own military, and they could also have their own judges and legal system. And so this made it a lot easier for us to function after 1776. All right, so let me read this. Shortly after the fort was completed in September 1775, Daniel Boone brought his wife and daughter to Kentucky. So yeah, that was 1775 that they came. I thought it was the next year, but it was 1775. At Harrodsburg, Hugh McGarry, Richard Hogan, and Thomas Denton settled with their families. So in November of that year, John McClellan brought his family to Kentucky, and in one company with Colonel Robert Patterson, built a station which was named McClellan's. All right, now Robert Patterson, he is noted for founding Lexington, and he was here with McClellan and founded McClellan Station. But Georgetown, Kentucky, there's a plaque over there where Robert Patterson founded Georgetown. He also was part of the group that went up and founded Cincinnati. And so Robert Patterson was an organizer and evidently a pretty good businessman, and he helped establish these different communities. But so they built that station. So here you've got, here you go, McClellan Station that he helped found ended up becoming Georgetown. And let's see. Here's another thing they point out about the women. So I just want you to see how the ability in these difficult times to act reasonably seems to have been so important to Mrs. Kincaid when she wrote this history book. On page 17 of your book, here's what she says. Today, we look back to their lives, and it's talking about the women, of unselfish devotion, and are thrilled with admiration for what? For their courage. For their courage. And so, again, you're going to see a few stories in the book as we move ahead where the women have to be very, very courageous because they face the danger of not only wild animals but the attack by the Indians through this whole period of time. All right, I think last week we talked about Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton, and a guy named Isaac Shelby. Here's where it talks about Boone on page 17, and it's where it says that he wasn't inspired by any high motive. He just kind of loved the outdoors and the unopened, unpeopled lands, the wild woods and everything. But it says that beside him, there towers another picturesque figure, Simon Kenton. So evidently, at this period of time, at least in the public school system and with Miss Kincaid, it seems that Kenton was more famous or probably more appealing than Daniel Boone as far as character and the way he interacted. So Daniel Boone, his reputation has suffered at different times, depending on which history book you read. But there were times when he was seen as somewhat less than noble. But other times when he's sort of justified in the way he lived his life. And so that's kind of an ongoing question with historians, but at least Miss Kincaid, even if we don't agree with her about Daniel Boone, I think we would agree with her that Simon Kenton was a very valiant and courageous and noble individual. I believe I told you last week that I think it was about 54 when he finally became a Christian at a revival up in northern Kentucky. So you read in the book about Simon Kenton running the gauntlet. He ran it 8 times, and I'm sure you've seen this. We'll watch a video in class, and you'll see him run the gauntlet, or you'll see somebody run the gauntlet. I don't remember if it's Simon Kenton, but basically what they do is they line the braves, the Indian braves up, and sometimes they also line up the women in the beginning. And in order for you to survive, you've got to run between the 2 lines, and they have sticks and sometimes tomahawks, and they're swinging at you as you go. And so Kenton was caught 2 or 3 times, and he was made to run this gauntlet 7 or 8 times. And one time they actually hit him in the head with a tomahawk, and until he died he had a little hole in his skull that was there because of that tomahawk. But anyway, he was really respected by the Indians, and 3 times they were getting ready to burn him at the stake. That's another thing they did, is that one of the ways they would torture you is they would burn you at the stake, tie you to a post, and then pile dead limbs around you, light it, and just watch you scream and be tortured to death. Smoke inhalation, burning your flesh. But 3 times Kenton was saved by some miraculous intervention. It started to rain one time. Another time that was very interesting, there's a guy named Simon Gertie. Simon Gertie was a white man, but a white man who had decided to identify with the Indians. So he joined in with the Shawnee, and he was pretty treacherous. I guess he felt like it was wrong for the Europeans to take the Indians' land, and so he liked the Indian way of life, so he just became an Indian. But he really admired Simon Kenton, and so one time when Simon had been caught and he'd been taken up north, he'd gone from village to village, he'd been running these gauntlets. Now they were going to burn him at the stake. But this guy, Simon Gertie, who really doesn't have a good reputation in Kentucky history, but at least at this point, he did not want to see this brave, courageous fighter, Simon Kenton, burned at the stake. And so he saved him. They released him and let him go, which was just an amazing thing for Simon Kenton. So on page, let's keep going and walking through the chapter. On page, at the bottom of page 17, I just want to read these because it points out a couple of things. For the major part, the pioneers in Kentucky were from that unsurpassed race of people, the Scotch Irish, who settled in the Valley of Virginia and then spread out into the neighboring states. Scotch Irish, she calls it. Some people call it Scots Irish. But the Scotch Irish were Scottish men that had come from Scotland, and then they had traveled to Northern Ireland. And so the north part of Ireland had Scottish people who had settled there. But the reason they had come was because of lack of opportunity in Scotland. And when they got to Ireland, they were just as poor. And so many of those people left Northern Ireland and came over to the States. But when they got here, the period of time they were coming, there was no land in along the coast, and so they were funneled over into Kentucky. And so the Scots Irish, they were very well. If you think of William Wallace and Braveheart. They were just really tough people. And it took that kind of people to come over and to establish the few forts that would open the way for other people to come. It goes on, it says that their ancestors had suffered religious persecution in the old world. What's the old world? That would be Europe. And the pioneers brought into the rich free land of Kentucky an intense love of God. So they had loved God and they'd been persecuted. And so but they didn't deny God. They just left. And so when they came to Kentucky, they still had this sincere love, passionate love of God, of liberty. You see, they left because of religious persecution, and they wanted to be free. And for many people, and listen real close, you're gonna hear a lot about freedom and liberty in your lifetime. These people wanted to be free in order to practice their relationship with God and of education. And so, Mrs. Kincaid, I don't know if this is really as true as she flatly says, but she says they loved God, they loved liberty, and they loved education. Perhaps they did. The very first fort did have a school, and early on we had universities, colleges get started, seminaries get started. So possibly that's true too. But even if that's not completely historically accurate, we can see in 1900 what was important to the educators is that the people of Kentucky, especially the young people of Kentucky, did love Kentucky. So maybe we'll do a little more research and see if those early pioneers did have that love of education. Yeah, that might be a good question. What do you think? I think a lot of times we think of them like Daniel Boone. They just love the wild, open lands and the freedom. But maybe she's right. Maybe there was also coupled with that a love of education. Well, think about that. And if you know how to do research, maybe you could go online, or maybe you could go to the library and find out if there was this real sense of a desire for education in very early Kentucky. All right, so let's just look back, review some of the things we've said that you might want to remember that will be on your chart. First of all, think about courage. And then know what the Transylvania Company was and what the Wilderness Road was, or Boones Road was. And remember that ending scene where they're about to get there, but they're attacked by Indians. I think one person's killed, another one's wounded. Another one's wounded so significantly that they can't move him. And then eventually they move on. Remember that the first women, and we got that clear finally, the first women were Daniel Boone's women, his family. And he brought them in 1775, the same year that Boonesboro was established. So when it comes to dates, 1774, everybody say 1774. 1774 is when Fort Herod was built. They left Fort Herod that winter and came back in 1775. But also in 1775, Daniel Boone builds Fort Boone, or what we know now as Boonesboro, and then Benjamin Logan establishes Fort Logan. It was called St. Asaph in the beginning, but we know it today as Fort Logan. It's down in Stanford, Kentucky. So 1774, Fort Herod. 1775, Boonesboro and Fort Logan. And what happens in 1776? Those three dates, if you keep them in mind, will help you understand what's going on here. Okay? Then, let's see. The women show up. Again, they had to be very courageous. Boone, Kenton, running the gauntlet. Don't forget Simon Gertie. He's not real popular, but he's significant, at least in this story, because Simon Kenton would not have lived to become a Christian if Simon Gertie hadn't saved him from being burned at the stake. And then the character of the Kentuckians. They loved God, they loved liberty, and they loved education. Maybe. You're going to figure that out. You're going to study that. All right. Let's end with this wonderful story of Jemima Boone and the Callaway Girls. So Jemima Boone and two of the Callaway sisters, they were out paddling a canoe on the Kentucky River. And they were in the river. Boonesboro is on the south side. They got close to the north side, and there were Shawnee Indian. They jump out, they take the girls, and they kidnap them. They're screaming and yelling. Well, all of the men immediately grab their guns and get in their canoes. They go to the other side of the river and they begin a chase. Well, they chased them for a long time. They had to chase them 2 nights and 2 days. So imagine that you're in the woods and you're being dragged along by half-naked men that have war paint and feathers, and you don't speak their language. They may have a few words that they can use to sort of intimidate you. What would you do? Well, Jemima Boone was sort of the hero of this story, just like her father is the hero of a lot of stories. As she went along, she had enough sense to know that my daddy's coming after me. And so she would tear little pieces of her apron off and drop it because she knew her dad would be looking for signs. And as she would go, she would grab a twig and break it because she knew her dad was an expert trapper. He had spent years in these woods. She knew he was coming. Well, one night they found the girls and they attacked the Indians. The Indians fled and they got the girls back. And one of the young men that was on the raid was a guy named Samuel Henderson. He was a young son of Henderson. And the 2 Callaway girls were there. Well, when they got back, it wasn't long before the older Callaway sister and Samuel announced that they were going to get married. And just as a side note, the person who married them was a guy named Squire Boone. As you can guess, he was related to Samuel. It was his brother. And Squire was a pretty famous pioneer in his own right. We don't hear a lot about him in this book, but he probably did some things just as exciting as Daniel Boone. He was with him pretty often in a lot of the escapades. Sometimes they mention him, but other times he's there and you don't hear about him. But so Mrs. Kincaid, the writer of our book, she's a lady, and so she ends this chapter with a romance where the 3 girls are saved by this party of brave men, and in the end, the oldest Callaway girl marries Samuel Henderson. So there you go. That's sort of a romantic view of this period of time where the pioneers were trying to get established in this pretty treacherous ground, pretty difficult area. So what we'll do next is we'll talk about Kentucky after 1776. We become a county, and now the war really breaks out. So there's going to be a lot of Indian raids. We're going to meet a guy named Tecumseh, and I'll probably introduce you to a guy named Blue Jacket. Blue Jacket was an Indian from over in Carolina. He has a very interesting story. And then Daniel Boone will be captured by the Indians in the next couple of chapters. And he'll get his name, I think, some walking turtle or something. But he lives with them for quite a while, but then he escapes. So we'll be talking about all of that in the next couple of weeks. All right, this week, keep reading, do your journals. I hope you've chosen your characters. Pass your journals in, and I'll get those when I get back into town. And you can hand those to, let's see, go ahead and hand those to Mrs. Corrosive, and she'll pass them on to me. All right, y'all have a great week. God bless you, and God bless the Commonwealth.